Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is chop. Let's look at a couple definitions for the use of this verb. The first way we use the verb chop, and probably the most common way, is to mean to cut something into pieces with repeated cuts. And you might be using either an axe or a knife or some other kind of sharp tool. A second way this verb chop is used is to mean to reduce the size of something. Chop is a regular verb. Because this verb ends in a consonant, vowel, consonant, H-O-P, we need to double the last consonant or add a second P before we add ing to make chopping. We're going to follow the same rule in making the past tense and participle forms. We're going to add a second P and then add ed. Because this verb ends in a p sound, the ed is going to make a T sound. Chopped, chopped. Let's take a look at some phrasal verbs next. One phrasal verb you might hear is chop down, and its meaning is to cut a large plant at the bottom so that it falls to the ground. Usually this action is to remove something completely. So here's an example sentence. They chopped down 2 trees yesterday. Another phrasal verb you might hear is chop off, and its meaning is to remove something by cutting. Here's an example sentence. She's going to chop off her hair as soon as it's safe to go to a salon. So just another way to say cut off in this way. The last phrasal verb we'll look at today is chop up, and it means to cut something into many small pieces. Here's an example of that. He chopped up 4 potatoes for the soup. Let's continue practicing using chop in a few different tenses. Today we'll talk about the imperative or giving commands. We'll practice simple past and simple present. Let's start with the imperative. Remember, this is very unique because there's no subject that's mentioned in this type of sentence, whether it's spoken or written. The subject is implied, and the subject is you or you plural, meaning more than one person. So we're going to start an affirmative sentence with the base verb. Chop up 2 onions. This might be a sentence you see used in a recipe, for example. If I want to make a negative imperative, I'm going to start with don't and then the base verb. Here's an example of that. Don't chop down the tree. Just trim the branches. Okay? So trim is another word that is similar or kind of connected to this idea of chopping or cutting. Next, let's look at simple past. In the affirmative, we're going to use the ed form of this verb. Here's an example of that. The governor chopped the department's budget. This sentence is an example of that second definition we looked at earlier, reducing the size of something. So again, this is not a knife or an axe being used, but it's just referring to a reduction, to reduce something. And the nice thing about simple past tense is no matter what my subject is, we're always going to use that past tense form. Let's look at negative next. To make a negative simple past tense sentence, we're going to use did not and then the base verb. You're probably going to hear native speakers use the contraction form didn't. Here's an example sentence. I didn't chop the vegetables into small enough pieces. If I want to make a question in the simple past tense, I'm going to start with did, then I'll have my subject, and then the base verb. Here's an example of that. Did she chop the herbs earlier today? Next, let's take a look at simple present. We use this verb tense to talk about habits and routines. We also use it to discuss facts, our feelings as well. So let's take a look at an affirmative sentence. She chops off her hair at the beginning of each summer. So this sentence is describing a habit or a routine that this particular woman engages in at the start of each summer. If I was talking about two women, right, I would say they chop off. So the thing to remember about the simple present and the affirmative is if our subject is he, she, or it, we're going to need an S on the end of our verb. Next, let's look at negative. To make negative in the simple present, we're going to use does not and then the base verb if our subject is he, she, or it, or do not and the base verb if our subject is I, you, we, or they. Here's an example sentence. We don't chop the broccoli when we cook that dish. Again, describing a habit or a routine. Finally, if we want to make a question in the simple present, we're going to start with do or does, then our subject, and then the base verb. Do you chop up the garlic or leave it whole for this recipe? Let's take a look at some words that are related to our verb chop. The first is the noun form of this word. It has the exact same spelling and the exact same pronunciation. Just like our verb, it can also have a couple different meanings. One meaning of chop is a downward cutting blow or movement with the hand. So might think of it kind of like this, right? So here's an example sentence. The man was accused of delivering a karate chop to the woman's neck. So this might be describing something that was in a movie or could be an actual event as well. Hopefully not for the sake of the woman, because that would probably hurt. A second meaning for chop is a thick slice of meat. And I looked this up because I was sort of curious. I think the reason this has its particular meaning is to be able to cut in certain places of the animal requires a very heavy blow to be able to do it. So that's how it got its name. So here's an example of chop as a noun. Did they make pork chops for dinner? I think you're going to be more likely to hear chops used with pork and with lamb, just those types of meat. The next related word we're going to look at is chopper. Okay? The first meaning for it could be a person or thing that chops. So you might think of some appliances or tools that people have in their kitchen to make the process of chopping vegetables easier. That's going to be our first example. The chopper can quickly and easily cut vegetables, cheeses, nuts, and herbs. A second meaning for chopper is slang for helicopter. So here's an example sentence of that. The military chopper flew 100 miles. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.